Welcome to another episode of At Home with Cathy. And continuing in our season 3 theme of Renew, I have this wonderful old card table. Now, my grandmother had card tables too. She was a huge bridge player, but hers were all square. So when somebody said, would you like this round card table to paint? The answer was absolutely. It's so beautiful. It's so elegant. These long, thin legs that come to a little tiny round. And it folds up so beautifully. The nice band. As when we flip it over and paint the top, you'll see the surface is in great condition, but it is the perfect painting project. And I don't know about you, but I find a card table very useful. They fold up and go away, and then when you have 4 more people for dinner than you thought at Christmas time, you have extra space and extra seats. So we're going to paint this, again, following the how-tos in the colorist magazines. Now this colorist magazine was the very first issue Annie did. And beautiful, beautiful stories in here of how people are inspired to paint and create. And we are going to go all the way to the back here. And we're going to stencil the top of this table when we're finished. Every colorist magazine has a stencil included in it. So this one is this simple, just geometric pattern, and we're going to reproduce this on the top once we've painted this table. What a stencil can do is 2 things. It can add a second color without distressing, but it can also help disguise an irregular surface. And you'll see when we flip this over and begin to paint it, it's an old card table. It's had use, but there's nothing wrong with it. It just needs to be updated in terms of color. So the 2 colors I've chosen to do this project, and again, I'm trying to keep it a little bit neutral in some cases. I think we're going to get a little wild with a few of these pieces that we're painting as part of our project Renew. But I've chosen Versailles, a beautiful soft green, and then the stencil is going to be an original, which is an off-white. Together they're very calm, very quiet, make a beautiful card table if you were playing cards or bridge, but also will make a somewhat elegant dining table if you need a place for those extra dinner guests. So let's get started with the legs. I like painting from the bottom to the top, because by the time I've painted these legs, I'll be able to flip this over and paint the top. We're using Versailles, giving it a good stir. And again, I'm going to wet my brush. Just wetting the brush just stops the paint from sticking to the brush so much and being absorbed by the bristles. And dry it off. Oops, get a little bit of paint and start painting. It will likely take 2 coats. My experience with metals is that they tend to streak a little bit. And while we're painting a folding leg table, you can just see that I'm going to have lines here. So the thing to remember when you're painting a card table is you want to paint the parts of the mechanism so they don't show underneath. But you want to paint it, don't paint the springs, don't paint the working parts, the moving parts. Just lightly brush in around them so that you can be sure when you go to fold the legs that they actually fold. You don't want to have to break your paint. Do that. These are so fast to paint. And I'm not going to worry about painting the hole underneath here. You could if you wanted to, but you're not going to see it, so it doesn't really, you only see it when you're flipping it upside down to paint it. You don't really need to worry about that. So we're going to paint the legs and come back and flip the table over. So like everything else that I paint, I prep by, the first thing you do is you wash it really, really well. I just use warm water and a squirt of Dawn dish detergent and scrub it and scrub it and scrub it. This had a little bit of, I don't know, it was almost like glue on it, that most of it I just picked off. But you can see it has a textured surface, and over the years this textured surface has absorbed a few mishaps, and there's a cut in the vinyl, but it's not affecting the performance. So I am just going to paint the whole thing with a good thick coat. Now I don't want to paint leaving thick paint like that. I need to work the paint in to the texture of this vinyl. So again, it's not by adding a whole lot of paint thick, dipping my brush in all the way. It's moving the paint with the tips of the brush. Moving it from where I have lots to where I need it. And I'm going to work it in all the way here. I have a little brush here right there. Until I can see the texture of the, I should have flicked this brush out. We're going to just move it back here. At the same time, we're going to do these sides. It's metal. If I were going to use the table outside and I had any rust on it, I would put a little bit of rust inhibitor, brush a coat on, or brush a coat of lacquer on to seal that rust so it doesn't come through, because it'll come through again otherwise. And again, this is probably going to require 2 coats. For some reason, almost any time I paint something metal, I find it needs 2 coats. It's just the way the paint sort of slides over that shiny finish on most metals. But we're just going to work the paint in. If I found it a little bit thick, I could dip my brush in water and work it in a little bit more that way. But I actually want a good heavy coat, so I don't want to do that if I don't have to. So we're going to finish. We're going to paint all the way around, come back and look and see if it needs a second coat. So now our table is not going to need a second coat, I don't believe, on the actual surface. You can see the texture of the vinyl coming through. I am going to have to do a second coat all the way around all the metal parts, and that's fine, I can do that. But let's talk about getting ready to do a stencil. Now, this is a square stencil. This is the stencil that came in this book. And what I've done is I've measured it to make it square on the paper, because it'll make it easier when it comes time to actually stencil. If I cut it out and I make it square, and I'll show you why in just a second. I'm going to cut it out. Now I have a square stencil. It means I can use it any which way, but I also have a better point of reference, because the first thing I have to do is figure out where the center of my table is. I'm going to use a square stencil on a round table, so obviously that's not going to fit neatly all the way around the side. But what I do is I go from table leg, and I can feel that leg, to table leg. That's going to give me the center. So this is exactly 36 inches. So my center is 18. I'm going to put a little pencil mark there. Now I can be sure of that by going the other way. Find the other leg, go all the way across to 36, and find my 18. So now I have to find somewhere in the middle. 18. And then double check. 18. And it could be just a little, so I'm going to put a dot right there. That's going to be my center stencil. And because I do want this to have some sort of pattern, I'm going to try and line it up so that the points in the center stencil are lined up with my legs. So what I might do is just come up here and put a little tiny pencil mark where the leg actually comes up. I can feel it here. I can always paint over that because it won't erase very easily, but at least I will know where each leg is. And it'll help be a point of reference as I try and do my stencil. So now one of the other things I can do to help line it up is use my tape measure. There's my line, there's my line, here's my 18. I want my stencil centered. So now I'm going to put tape. I don't want to do it yet because it's still just a tiny bit wet. I'm going to put tape all around here, painter's tape, to secure my stencil, and then I'll work out how many more patterns or repeats I can get. So for instance, this is my line here. I can come this way and do one more. I can go here. Probably I can get a repeat pattern of 9 squares here. I might even be able to get one more. But I'll just look at it and I'll start from the center and I'll decide how that is going to look. To do my stencil, I'm going to use, and I left this open just so we can see it. Again, this is the how-to, is all in the first edition of The Colorist. And what they're using is a foam roller and the mix mat. This mix mat is silicone. Paint doesn't stick to it. So you can pour some paint out. We're going to use original when we're ready. Pour some paint out. Roll your paint in this, clean it off. I usually keep a little paper towel because you do not want it to be over saturated with paint, because when you push down hard on it, that's just going to squish out underneath the stencil and make it look messy. But when you do the stenciling, I'll leave this right in here, you're going to go one way very lightly, then you're going to go the other way, just to make sure that you got your coverage. Now before I stencil, I like this to be really dry, because if I have to correct the stencil, I'm either going to have to paint over it or it's going to pick up green paint from underneath if it still has a little bit of wetness to it. And because this is a textured material, the paint is in all that texture as well. So I don't want it to bleed out a little bit because the green is still wet. So I will let this probably sit overnight before I actually do the stenciling. When you come back and we have a look at this table, we'll have 2 coats on all the metal. We'll have the beginning of the stencil, and we will finish that stencil so you can actually see how it looks and works. And then we're going to wax the whole thing to protect it. So thank you for joining me for another episode of At Home with Cathy, and we'll see you next week. There are 3 ways you can participate in our Renew project. 1, donate a piece for me to paint. Send me a picture though, I can't paint everything. And we're still looking for 4 or 5 pieces that we need to paint, and we will paint and donate them to the auction or to Chrysalis House. 2, you paint along with me. Come in and get some paint. We'll consult on colors. We'll give you a discount on your purchase. You paint along with me and donate your piece to the auction in May, and we'll make sure those funds go directly to Chrysalis House. Or 3, what if you don't want to paint or donate? You could donate cash. Project Renew is a building fundraiser for Chrysalis House. You can contact them directly to make arrangements on how to donate. Welcome to the project.